Hi, my name is Emily Comark, and this is my case study for school law, internet use violations. First of all, the problem. The problem is that Mrs. Walker received an email with a web address that had derogatory comments and assumed threats for her safety. That's the big problem. However, there are lots of other issues underlined in this one situation. For example, the fact that Mrs. Walker has a very rigorous course and seems to be putting a lot of stress on her students. Dr. Forbes and Mrs. Walker have had some meetings to try to continue to have suggestions for her to manage that situation, and she has been unable to implement those strategies. What do we know? We know that she has high expectations of her students, that parents and students have complained about the high stress and anxiety for her courses. She's not implemented the strategies. She teaches in an affluent area. She has made Dr. Forbes aware of the situation regarding the email. And we do know that she has an assumption of who might be the originator or author of the potential threat, or prank, whichever it is. What do we need to know? We need to know if it's a threat or a prank. We need to know where the web address originated from. We need to know is there any other reason for Mrs. Walker to suspect Randy? Are there other suspects? Did this come from a parent? Did this come from a student? Did this come from potentially other staff members? All of those are things to keep in mind. Had there been any parent incidents? What are some school policies and procedures for violation of ethical technology use? Has this been shared beyond the originator? And who is responsible for the content? A plan of action. First, we need to investigate with students the following day and follow school policy and procedures. So we'll meet with Mrs. Walker and the technology director, try to see if we can find out who the author is, identify the sources if possible, continue to investigate with individuals that may be involved, see if we can figure out who or what the source is. Is it really a threat? Is it really a prank? What are the intentions with the information? Second, we're going to have meetings and discussions with parents if it was a student, or parents if it was parents, or other staff members if they were the ones sending the information. The school resource officer wants to discuss consequences and what the course moving forward will be to ensure Mrs. Walker's safety and feelings of being safe within the building and her classroom. And we'll continue to encourage Mrs. Walker to have positive relationships and classroom strategies to minimize the stress in her classroom to potentially avoid or prevent another incident in the future. 3, we're going to enforce consequences and continue to support and encourage Mrs. Walker. So again, we're going to continue to possibly offer more professional development for Mrs. Walker, make sure that all the responsible parties are carrying out their consequences and aware of how significant their potential threat could be to someone. And then build a staff support team for Mrs. Walker to help her feel not only comfortable and safe in the building, but also support her as she continues to work on balancing the rigor and stress of the classroom for students and best practices. Promoting the academic success and personal well-being of the students. First of all, we are following the school handbook and rules for violating internet regulations. Those will be enforced. We would be promoting a fair environment for students and show that all students will have an opportunity to learn from their mistakes, if it was indeed a student. Mrs. Walker and Dr. Forbes will also have an opportunity to discuss the significant impact the stress level of her class is having on students. We want to make sure that we are keeping our students' best interests in mind by not pushing them to an unwell state mentally and physically, Yes, we want to be challenging and have rigorous courses, but not so rigorous that we have unwell children. We are promoting the academic success of all students by giving them chances to correct their mistakes and learn from them. Students are going to be developing their character as they realize they will not be able to say or do things without having consequences, and build that that relationship of handling conflict in healthy ways. Students need to be able to handle their conflict in healthy ways to be better prepared for the workforce and college and career ready. All of those things are important. I was thinking if this is a real concern for Mrs. Watson's safety, why is Dr. Forbes so passive about the situation? I understand remaining calm, but there are significant consequences if we aren't taking a real serious approach to something that is a potential threat. What are the school district policies for internet violations? Without knowing their policies, it's a little bit difficult to enforce their rules. And there are some legal consequences if it is a potential threat to Mrs. Watson, and she can pursue those with the situation and individuals involved, and that could have a significant impact on those relationships that are already strained as well. I was initially feeling a concern for Mrs. Watson, as you are unsure if it's a prank or a threat, not quite sure. You still need to make a choice on safety, being safe. I was feeling confused a little bit about Dr. Forbes' response, as it seemed that in the beginning he was so passive about the situation that he may not be concerned for his staff member and those involved. I think he is concerned, but I also think that maybe just he came off, but also knowing the background of their conversations and her not being willing to implement some strategies that may come off as an assumption that he doesn't really value what she brings to the table, in the sense that she's not willing to make some changes. I was also feeling frustrated regarding students or parents or other staff members that would not be able to handle conflicts with Mrs. Watson in an appropriate way. I think, unfortunately, handling conflict is a tough situation, and having those difficult conversations is important and key, especially in school buildings. But I think that I get very frustrated when people act impulsively and don't handle conflict in the right way. I was definitely valuing the hard work and time that people put into acceptable use policies and school policies and outlining consequences. That work is tedious and time consuming. However, it makes a big difference when you're the administrator having to deal with the consequences and deal with the problems and issues that arise. So you definitely value those people who take the time to sit down and work with you on those policies and procedures. I also value the teachers that put in the hard work to make their classes challenging, but also put in the hard work, which is equally important, to build relationships, positive relationships with their families, their students and their families. If you can balance that well, if you have good teachers that are working on both of those, you really reduce the stress level for students and create academic learning environments that are not only safe and healthy, but challenging. And I also value the safety and concern that my current administration has for its employees when issues arise. And our administration is always very conscientious about how it impacts students first, teachers and staff second, and families kind of intertwined in those two as well. But it really does help when you have an administrator who takes things very seriously and values everyone's safety and concerns. The unresolved issues, there are several unresolved issues. One is with the lack of respect and positive relationships built with Mrs. Watson and between Mrs. Watson and our students and our families. That's unresolved. We need to continue to work on that and build on that. offer more support so that she can make those connections and support her students in a positive way. Another unresolved issue is the potential lack of support from Dr. Forbes in the initial timing of the threat and the feelings Mrs. Watson was experiencing. If you have a real threat and you don't follow through and act on that and support your teachers in that, then you potentially have a huge concern with the fact that that could have been a real threat and you did nothing about it. What happens then? And another unresolved issue is who indeed did the threat come from? Was it an upset student, upset parent, another staff member being vindictive? You never know. We live in a very interesting world. So promoting success, and as an administrator in this case, I was able to promote success by supporting Mrs. Watson in continuing to gain professional development to balance the academic rigor and the stress, promoting learning opportunities to happen when students were handed a consequence based on the regulations of the district, and allowing for the district to continue to learn about filtering and ways to combat material that is not helpful for education in the classroom. It does lend itself to a more strict filter. What can we do? How can we recognize these kinds of things before we have teachers feeling the way that Mrs. Watson felt? As the acting administrator, there were some ethical standards. For example, making sure that the IT staff member was able to help identify the real source rather than just going off of assumptions. Also acting ethically by not letting students get away with doing something because their frustrations, while I might agree that some of Mrs. Watson's actions might be frustrating, I still acted professionally in the way that I would be able to support her and promote her continued learning. And I was also able to conduct communication meetings with all parties involved. Overall, this case lends itself to a plethora of questions, naturally, that go unanswered and without having a set, rules and regulations handbook. That can be difficult to intertwine all of those. However, it gave me a great learning opportunity to think beyond my elementary building, beyond what I typically handle as conflicts or consequences or things that I would think of based on from a legal standpoint or from just an educational standpoint. It gave me an opportunity to really think and reflect beyond what I typically do. Thank you.